one of the questions I'm asked from time to time is what my thoughts are on how the Disney canon and the EU canon timelines fit together. And I mean, I never mean to be rude, but I mean, basically my answer is I don't really care. I don't really have an opinion other than to say I don't follow the Disney canon closely enough to know whether or not they do fit. And moreover, I do know the following at least. I know what Disney's decision in 2014 was, and it was to decanonize. And they've reaffirmed that decision over and over and over again. I think it was a bad decision, but then again, it gives us the opportunity to allow Disney to pursue its supposed creative freedom it reported it needed to sort of tell a different storyline, and allows us to one day sort of convince Disney to continue Legends story timeline along its own path. And I'm looking forward to that day when that happens. In the meantime, I don't necessarily have any. I mean, why would I? I don't have a. It's just what fans would do. I don't have a problem per se with people going out of their way to sort of see what ways in which the new canon fits along the EU timeline path, and if people want to do that, that's great. The only problem I think I do have as an EU fan is frankly when I think they want to make more out of it than you really can. I mean, again, Disney's pretty clear. They didn't decanonize in 2014 just a few years later to make sure that both timelines fit together. That's just not going to happen. Even if everything was internally consistent, even if you could in some sense lay the two timelines on top of one another, it would still just be a coincidence. Despite lots of interesting loopholes we can argue about, for instance, coming out of Fantasy Flight games and things like that, that maybe imply that different timelines can be sort of retconned and understood to be sort of like propaganda or misunderstood or corruptions of holocron files. There's a million ways in which you could create loopholes to do this. But again, we're not talking about really the same sort of universe. We're talking about a different canon, a different timeline. There is a Disney canon and there's the EU timeline. It gets confusing, of course, when Disney pulls in characters like Thrawn, and I've heard that Dash Rendar's ship is in Rebels. And again, what you have to really understand there's a great deal of complexity and subtlety here about understanding the extent to which Disney is, quote unquote, in many views, fans, canonizing things from the EU. They're not. That's an absurdity. They don't canonize something from another canon. They introduce a new character into their canon who shares similarities with characters and other ideas from the EU. So Thrawn from the EU is not in Rebels. Instead, a character similar to Thrawn, who they call Thrawn, who has a slightly different background, is now a character in that show. Dash Rendar is not now quote-unquote canon simply because his ship has appeared in Rebels. A character similar to Dash Rendar, who they call Dash Rendar, whose ship is similar to Dash Rendar's EU ship, is now a ship in Rebels. So there's a subtle difference there. These things aren't canonized. They don't get canonized. They're a new part of the Disney canon that bear a striking resemblance to the EU, but that are not the EU. So again, this is what partially feels, I think, kind of a fun kind of like initially kind of harmless sort of fan fiction idea of sort of seeing how the two canons fit together. But I think that, again, don't make too much of it. I mean, strategically too, I mean, if you're an EU fan interested in sort of getting Disney one day to pursue the EU timeline further, obviously, you know, sort of like the extent to which we're encouraging Disney to sort of like pull these characters in and the way in which we talk about them sort of quote unquote canonizing these characters gives them sort of a release valve, I think, strategically, not to have to then one day focus on just giving us more stories from our own unique timeline. So I think there's that strategic problem to it. But I'm not that concerned. Again, as it concerns the EU movement, I think everyone should be free to try every tactic and strategy they like. I think the only thing we should do is just keep the objective in mind. I think we should norm on the objective, and that's getting more legends. And I think how it is you go about doing that is completely up to you. You know, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's see what works. My final comment, though, on this, I have to say, is particularly for fans, and I feel there's fans kind of on both sides. I've seen this on the Disney canon side, and I've in particular seen EU fans both go to Disney to say things like, hey, when is Mara Jade going to be in the movies? You know, say Disney canon fans who happen to know that there was this character that everyone seems to like from the EU. And of course, SAU fans who love Mara Jade, and those of them who are interested in this kind of fan fiction idea of seeing how the two timelines mash up, they are increasingly asking, authors like Zahn, they're asking, Pablo Hidalgo on Twitter, they're asking just, in general, other Star Wars Disney canon fans, when is this EU sort of storyline going to be canonized? When is, X, Y, and Z character going to be canonized? I just have to say, think about how absurd it would be if you flip the scenario. Okay, imagine us going to Disney to say, hey, when is Mara Jade? When is this Legends character going to be a part of the Disney canon? Imagine how absurd it would sound if we went to Disney to say, oh, Disney, when are you going to finally give us a Legends story with Kylo Ren? When is BB-8 finally going to be a part of like a Ryder Wyndham EU Legends children's book? It's absurd, and no one is asking for that. No one ever would. It would be absurd to. We're not asking for Kylo Ren Legends stories. Stop asking for Mara Jade Disney canon stories. Keep it fan fiction, have a great time, have philosophical debates till the cows come home about how the timelines could fit together, but just know, don't get ahead of yourself. Don't set yourself up for any sort of really sad disappointment at the end of the day. Disney is not going to decanonize this to come back a few years later to make sure it all fits together. Even if some red-headed character who was the Emperor's Hand, enters into the movies or the new Disney canon and marries Luke and they have a child, it's not the EU's Mara Jade. Mara Jade has not now been canonized. No, instead, in the new Disney canon, a character similar to Mara Jade with red hair who marries Luke has been introduced. And that's it. And that's sadly it. That's, again, part of the unfortunate thing Disney has, I think, done to the EU movement. It's to sort of continue to divide things in this way and make it really, really complicated for us. I think, frankly, the thing I appreciate the most when I'm asked this question about, by fans about, do the timelines fit together and what do I think about this project of trying to get them to fit, is I think to me it is a sign of just still how sad we are and how hungry we are to see more EU characters. But again, the good news is there's a path. And the path isn't just getting Disney to quote unquote canonize similar characters and call them the same things but tweak the backstories. The path is celebrating the EU, showing fans of both the EU and folks outside, including the Disney canon fan, and people who are just new to sci-fi and fantasy in general, how fun it is to be an EU fan and how great the EU is, and ultimately to convince Disney one day to give us more legend stories along our own timeline. I think that's the path. I think in the meantime, enjoy the fan fiction, but just think about how absurd it is. Next time you ask for Mara Jade in a movie, think about, is anyone on the Disney canon side asking for a BB-8 legend story? No, that'll never happen. No one's asking for that. Let's keep the canon separate, and let's take Disney at their word. If they wanted the creative freedom to pursue a new story, let's make sure they do it, and not bother about what they do over there, so that one day they can allow Legend to continue along the path that that we're so ready to sort of consume. We're so hungry for more, right? So, okay, that's it for today. That's just some thoughts off the top. Hope they're not too controversial. Again, to be absolutely clear, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that people who want the two canons to work are dumb or bad. I think it's wonderful, awesome fan fiction and a sign that people just love Star Wars, right? Again, I think at the end of the day, though, keep those canons separate, take Disney at their word, and that way, when Disney does eventually give us more Legends content, we won't have to deal with a book about Kylo Ren or BB-8. All right, that's it, guys. Talk to you later.